The Reserve Bank warns on home loans, pleas for people to start wearing masks again as the COVID spread escalates, and the chair of Tesla says Australia's lithium industry is the greatest opportunity of the century. It's Wednesday, the 20th of July, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Now, I have a question for you. I was in the office and we ended up talking about our story yesterday. And that, of course, was the one about the biggest movie releases of the year. We went round to the best-selling female and male artists. So we're going to have a little quiz today, Michael.
As in actors or music artists?
I'm sorry, no, music artists. Music artists. So today we'll do female, tomorrow we can do male.
Okay.
You get one guess, and I'll tell you whether you're right or wrong at the end. Who is the best-selling female artist of all time?
Of all time? I'm going to say, can I nominate two?
Sure.
I will say Madonna.
Yep.
Or Aretha Franklin.
Ah, righto. Good choices. Good choices. We'll find out at the end of the show, Michael.
Are you actually going to make me wait?
Sure am.
Oh, well played. You've hooked me through to the end.
Good.
And because also another reason to keep listening is because after the show, coming up next, you've got an interview with Persia Navidi, who is a partner at Hickson's Lawyers, about an area of risk that companies really need to start thinking about.
Yes, it's all been about cybersecurity recently, but the new one is climate litigation, and particularly around corporate law and human rights. We talked to Persia about the growth in that area and what businesses should do to prepare themselves.
It's a good look. I'm still distracted by the quiz question that you asked me. So I will be sticking around and I'll probably pepper you with a few more suggestions as we go throughout the show.
Righto.
But the main story this morning, Sean, it's a big one. The Reserve Bank has warned that close to 1/3 of all mortgage holders will pay 40% more to repay their home loans if rates rise by 3 percentage points as forecast by financial markets.
And that is worrying the central bank, even if on balance, households are in pretty good shape. The bank's analysis also shows that 1/3 of variable rate borrowers have already been paying extra, so the recent hikes won't really affect them. The problem with that is it means the Reserve Bank might have to lift rates more to make an impact. Another worry for the bank is what happens when people who took out a fixed rate loan in 2020 or 2021 when rates were low, what happens when they shift onto much higher rate variable loans? The greatest concentration of that will happen at the end of next year. The Reserve Bank Deputy Governor Michelle Bullock yesterday said that the official cash rate is probably well below where it needs to eventually be, which is a more neutral rate. Now, the central bank has lifted the cash rate from 0.1% to 1.35% in the last 3 months, and analysts expect it to go another 0.5 percentage point in August and further later in the year. Ms. Bullock said households had relatively high levels of debt, but concerns have been offset by rising house prices, meaning increased wealth, a build-up of savings, and good bank behaviour, among other things. The people that are most vulnerable are the recent home buyers, she said, who have high mortgages and not made extra repayments. And she warned that if they took the loan out recently, their ability to repay won't have been measured as stringently as if they took it out a few years ago. So that's a very worrying part of the economy for the bank.
Yeah, sure is. And these comments came after the Reserve Bank's July board meeting minutes were released.
Yes, this is the one where the decision was made to lift rates by 0.5 percentage point. The minutes show that future rate hikes will be guided by the outlook for inflation and the labour market, and the board expects price rises to peak late this year and then fall back in 2023. Let's hope so.
Yeah, so how did local markets respond to the news?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.6% yesterday to 6,650 points. It was a good day for the banks, with National Australia Bank up another 1.5%. It's been the big outperformer among the four majors in recent sessions. Commonwealth Bank and Westpac both closed 0.7% higher, while ANZ remains in a trading halt post its bid for Suncorp's banking business. Yesterday, Macquarie Group was down 3% and CSL was off 2%. The big miners were mixed while Woolworths was off 1%. The best performer on the day was Pendal, more of that shortly. Next best was Mesoblast, up 7.6%, and Whitehaven Coal. It had another great day, up more than 5%. Worst on the bourse among the top 200 at least was Xero, off 6%, while PointsBet fell by a similar amount.
And what about international markets?
Well, it's earnings season in Europe and on Wall Street at the moment. And in Europe, earnings downgrades are not enthusing investors, shall we say. So far, Wall Street results have been mixed. For example, Citibank was really good, but Goldman Sachs wasn't so good. One shock to the market was reported comments from Apple saying it planned to slow hiring and spending growth next year. That triggered a sell-off in the big tech company. Currency markets seem to be where all the action is at the moment. Yesterday, for example, the Indian rupee fell to a record low against the US dollar. As foreign investors dumped Indian equities, that's been happening non-stop. The Aussie dollar is trading around 68.5 US cents. It was a better day yesterday for cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin headed towards 23,000 US dollars a unit. That's up nearly 7%. Ether jumped 11%. Solana added 13%. And Polkadot, my favourite name for a digital currency, Michael, it rose about 7%.
I thought I knew cryptocurrencies reasonably well, but I had never heard of Polkadot.
Polkadot is actually one of the larger ones. It's not Bitcoin or Ether or Solana. But yes, there are so many out there. It's very difficult to keep track of the names.
Oh, there you go. I've just learned something, as well as learning soon who the biggest selling female music artist of all time is. So we will be back in a moment, Sean, with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, a pretty serious warning yesterday from the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, who yesterday said that Australia is at the start, not the end, of the BA4 and BA5 Omicron wave.
And he said the best thing to do to address the risk of severe disease from COVID-19 is take the vaccines as prescribed to your age group. If you're over 50 years, you should not delay the fourth dose, he said. The best vaccine is the one that's available, Dr. Kelly said, and he urged employers to let staff work from home. We're going to be hearing a lot more about that in coming weeks, getting people not to go into the office. Federal Health Minister Mark Butler reiterated that 2 doses of vaccine wasn't enough and said 5 million eligible Australians still haven't had a third jab. There have been 300,000 reported infections over the past week, though Mr. Butler said the real number was probably double that. Professor Kelly said that in every state and territory, cases are starting to rise and communities need to work together through mask wearing, for example, to minimise harm. His comments came after Therapeutic Goods Administration granted provisional approval to the Moderna vaccine for children aged 6 months to 5 years.
Yeah, that's very good news, that is. Now, Sean, Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek was at the National Press Club yesterday and said coal mining will continue to be part of Australia's prosperity, and it was not reasonable to say that it should stop altogether.
That's right. The Labor government has promised to cut emissions by 43% by the end of the decade, and Ms Plibersek was asked whether shutting down coal was a way to do it. Well, I'm sure it is a way to do it, but she didn't agree that was a good option. Mind you, she did add that Australia's current path wasn't sustainable.
Now, Sean, she was speaking at the release of the 2021 State of the Environment report, which she described as difficult, confronting, and sometimes depressing.
It's worth reading it, or even if you don't want to read it, scan it, because she's pretty right. The report says that things are getting worse, not better, and Australia has suffered a catastrophic loss of wildlife and habitat. It comes out every 5 years, and yesterday's edition says Australia has lost more mammals than any other continent. It really is depressing. Things like the Murray-Darling fell to its lowest water level on record in 2019. Another one, for the first time, Australia now has more foreign plant species than native ones.
Really?
Remember, during the May election campaign, Labor promised to overhaul environmental protection laws, and the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, it needs to.
Sean, the energy crisis in Australia has still some way to run, according to the boss of the regulator.
That's right. The Australian Energy Market Operator in June suspended the wholesale market. While it has resumed, Chief Executive Daniel Westerman warned yesterday that there are still significant issues facing the market. We saw that in Victoria 2 days ago. With 6 weeks of winter to go, we still expect some real problems in energy.
Sean, you mentioned Pendal earlier on, and now that group and another one of the country's biggest fund managers, Perpetual, are discussing a merger.
Yes, the two confirmed that discussions around a potential control transaction is how they put it. are taking place. Now, Pendle went into a trading halt. Once it came off, its share price closed up nearly 8%. Both sides said the discussions are in early stages. In April, Perpetual bid $2.4 billion for Pendle. It was knocked back then. If combined, the two would create an asset manager with about $200 billion in funds under management with a global footprint. Perpetual share price was down slightly yesterday.
Now, Sean, one of our favourite retailers to talk about is JB Hi-Fi, just because the story's been such a good one over the last few years. Now, it has posted record sales and earnings for last financial year, with online revenue up more than 50%.
It's hard to think of a better retailer in recent years than JB Hi-Fi, and I think its share price really reflects that, including yesterday's 2% jump and all the ups and downs throughout the COVID pandemic. JB's share price has more than doubled since early 2019. Same-store sales growth was up 11% in its Australian business in the June quarter. That's pretty impressive. The challenge for JB and other discretionary retailers is to keep up the good work, particularly given inflation and interest rates are rising. Growth will be much tougher in that environment, and that's probably why its share price rose only 2% and not more yesterday.
Sean, the chair of Tesla, Australian Robin Denholm, says the number of Teslas in Australia could double by the end of the year and has called for more lithium mines.
Yes, Ms Denholm told the Clean Energy Summit in Sydney that she believes Australia's greatest opportunity this century is to be a global leader in the battery supply chain, building on its resources of lithium and other minerals. Australia is already the largest producer of lithium, and of course that's used in batteries. We mine about half the globe's output. Ms Denholm said the world can't build batteries fast enough, and that could actually limit action on climate change at some point. She also urged the government to introduce fuel efficiency standards to help drive the uptake of electric vehicles, highlighting New Zealand, where new policies have helped almost triple EV sales in a little over a year. She is undoubtedly talking her book. She is the chair of by far the largest EV maker in the world, though she's certainly worth listening to given the trend.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty exciting to have an Australian at the top of one of the most kind of progressive companies in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very exciting. But could you imagine trying to manage Elon Musk?
Also one of the most challenging roles then in that case as well.
That's right.
Now, BHP, Sean, has warned that production volumes at its flagship iron ore and coking coal divisions will soften in the next 12 months.
And that comes after a tough year where the big Australian battled with weather and pandemic disruptions in the 2022 financial year. BHP reckons output will be about the same as the average for the past 3 years. Now, Western Australia's Pilbara iron ore region has become a hard place for miners to work, given the extreme labour shortages and a much stricter focus on preserving Indigenous cultural heritage. The first half export volumes reported by Rio last week were the weakest since 2015, while Fortescue's shift to selling more high-grade iron ore has also been slowed dramatically by heritage negotiations.
The number of IPOs on the ASX has collapsed in 2022, Sean, relative to last year, on fears of rising interest rates and global instability.
Just 15 floats were registered with the ASX as pending at the end of June, seeking to raise a total of $121 million compared with 43 proposed listings a year earlier, looking for $1.25 billion. That's according to a report on the IPO market by advisory firm HLB Mann Judd. That was reported in the Financial Review. The dire outlook for activity in the second half of this year comes after a pretty sluggish first 6 months, during which 59 listings raised $790 million, down from 61 listings raising $2.9 billion. You put all those numbers together, what we're saying is that raisings this year are scheduled to be less than $1 billion, and that compares to about $4.3 billion last year.
Yeah, big difference between the two. Now, in New South Wales, there is a story that we've been watching for a while now, and it just keeps on giving. It's an inquiry that's going on into the decision to offer former Deputy Premier John Barilaro a plum trade job in New York with about a $500,000 pay packet, I believe.
I think so. A senior government lawyer yesterday sided with the Barilaro argument, really. He rejected claims that public servant Jenny West was ever formally offered the US trade role, insisting the former bureaucrat was treated fairly, and describing her evidence to the inquiry last week, where she basically said she thought she had the role, as incorrect. Now, the inquiry continues, but the longer it goes, the worse it does look for the government.
Moving on to overseas news, and General Motors will finally start selling a battery-powered Chevrolet model next year, competing directly with the Tesla Model Y, which is the biggest selling EV in the US.
Yeah, General Motors has really fallen behind in the electric vehicle race, and its first battery-powered car at a reasonable price will go on sale in 12 months. It will quickly be followed by 2 other models. General Motors is reasonably confident it can take on Tesla, certainly in the US market. Obviously, there are lots of government regulations and incentives over there to push EVs, and so all the big car companies are moving into that area.
And new COVID-19 cases in China jumped to almost 700, with more infectious strains of the virus continuing to challenge the country's hardline approach as outbreaks spread beyond the major cities.
Yes, it reported 699 cases on Monday. Now, that's the highest daily tally since May 22, after suffering more than 1,000 infections at the weekend, according to Bloomberg. Most of the cases are centred in the hotspots of Ganji region in the south and the remote northwestern province of Gansu. We've had outbreaks in Beijing, Shanghai, many of the major cities. As you mentioned, we are now pushing into the countryside. Problem with all this is that while they have a zero COVID tolerance policy, the place remains closed down, growth slows, bad for the Australian economy.
All right, now up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed daily interview with Persia Navidi. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, it's a really interesting kind of look at the world of climate change litigation and the risk that companies need to be considering. That one's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. But what I think we've all been waiting for, well, I know I've been waiting for, the answer to the question that you asked me without any notice whatsoever at the top of the show for the highest selling female music artist of all time.
Yes, and the problem is that you got it right. It's Madonna.
Really?
Well done.
And do you know who number 2 was?
Rihanna.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, Aretha Franklin didn't get a look in, by the way, but Rihanna, and then it was Taylor Swift.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston. That's kind of more along your lines, isn't it, Whitney Houston? And
Why?
well, she's close to the age of Aretha Franklin, who's about 40 years older than everyone else. Then, Celine Dion makes the list. So too does, this is the top 10. So too does Barbara Streisand, Lady Gaga, etc., etc. There you go.
Oh, I think I just got lucky. I would have guessed any one of those as being the number 1. So, hey, I'm going to take that as a win, though. And I promise you I will not look up the best-selling male artist for tomorrow, just so that I can do that entirely legitimately.
Righto. Good.
All right, there we go. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 20th of July, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.